For the continuation of our project on educational inequality for low-income students, we will be focusing on the structures contributing to this inequality and the harms associated with it. My name is Sanaya Anderson, and you will hear from my partner Maddie Hayes in a little bit. First, we'll begin by reiterating who we are talking about and who is harmed by educational inequality. 51% of public school students in the U.S. are considered low income, often measured by eligibility for free or reduced price lunch. Continuing with definitions, we must also define social structures. Jonathan Eastwood defines social structures as durable, individual-spanning phenomena that enable and constrain our choices and that are themselves made of our interdependent choices. He categorizes them into three general groups: rules, representations, and relationships, or the 3 R's. The first social structure is a rule, Title I funding. According to the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education, or the OESE, within the Department of Education, Title I is a federally funded aid program for low-income schools and/or school districts, originating from the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. If a school meets or exceeds its local education agencies, or LEA, poverty threshold, which is often based on eligibility for free or reduced price lunch, it is Title I eligible, though there are some instances where a school does not meet the threshold but can be eligible at the discretion of the LEA. However, not all Title I eligible schools receive Title I funding, as the funds are allocated in rank order of poverty percentages. The LEA determines an allocation amount per free or reduced price lunch pupil, and that product is the school's Title I allocation. In the 2021 and 22 school year, 62,000 public schools were Title I eligible, with approximately 65% of Title I students in grades K through 5. Title I is vital for addressing educational inequality by providing additional resources to schools serving low-income communities. It funds programs like tutoring, early childhood education, and teacher development to support struggling students. However, its implementation often falls short due to inconsistent funding, inadequate oversight, and challenges in effectively targeting the most disadvantaged schools and/or students. While Title I has the potential to reduce achievement gaps and promote equitable education, its impact is limited without stronger accountability measures and more equitable resource distribution. Though the purpose of Title I is to give an extra boost to low-income students, it falls short, further perpetuating the achievement gap rather than alleviating it. To clarify, the insufficiency of Title I lies in the fact that it does not fulfill its purpose to an ideal extent. Research by scholars such as Sean Reardon and a data analysis of 3 studies conducted by NCES on the academic skills of kindergarten children suggests that low-income students enter school behind their peers, and that gap has barely narrowed, especially in the context of school readiness. Though the initial gap is seemingly impossible to close, Title I is supposed to narrow this gap significantly, as the purpose of this funding is to disseminate quality early childhood education and provide specialized teachers and resources for low-income students. A lack of targeting with these funds presents the insufficiency of Title I. A study done by public policy scholars at George Mason University employs a research synthesis approach, integrating national-level evaluations of Title I from 1966 to 2013. The authors supplement their findings with their own analysis of NAEP, or the National Assessment of Educational Progress data, from 1990 to 2013. Studying the achievement gap before and after key educational policies such as No Child Left Behind, the researchers found that academic achievement in the form of reading and math proficiency increased for all groups, but the income-based achievement gap persisted. For example, students exposed to Title I for many years scored lower in these proficiency tests than non-Title I participants. In all, Title I has failed to significantly reduce the inherent achievement gap between low-income and higher-income students. One reason for this is a drop in per-pupil allocation. Between 1997 and 2012, the per-pupil allocation dropped from about $1,500 to $600 due to expanded eligibility and remains relatively low. This meant more students were eligible, but less resources could actually be provided for them. Additionally, this widened eligibility decreases targeted programs for the individual low-income students and sparked a shift to school-wide programs. As of 2022, 67% of Title I eligible schools had school-wide implemented programs, diluting the impacts for those in need of Title I resources. Furthermore, school districts have immense flexibility in how they spend the funds, meaning there are gaps not only in consistency, but efficacy.
Another harmful social structure that perpetuates these harms is stereotypes. The stereotype that low-income kids are not as intelligent, not as interested in school, and not as well-behaved in classrooms as higher income kids. A study in 1968 was conducted by researchers Rothenthal and Jacobson, and it would become one of the most influential studies in educational psychology. Their methodology was elegantly simple. They administered a standard IQ test to all students at Oak School, an elementary school in a lower income neighborhood. They randomly selected 20% of students across all classrooms. Then they told the teachers these randomly selected students were intellectual bloomers who would show dramatic intellectual growth that year. They retested all students with the same IQ test at the end of the year. The results were striking. The randomly labeled bloomers showed significantly greater IQ gains than their peers, with average increases of 12.22 IQ points among first and second graders compared to 8.42 points for unlabeled students. Remember, these children weren't actually special bloomers. They were randomly chosen. The only difference was teacher expectations. Critics have raised some concerns about this study, specifically that the most dramatic effects were limited to younger grades. However, Rothenthal and Jacobs' core insights have been repeatedly validated. Teacher expectations can function as self-fulfilling prophecies, particularly for vulnerable students. How does this connect to the harm faced by low-income students? This effect helps explain how negative stereotypes about low-income students' abilities become a direct cause of adverse childhood experiences. When children internalize negative expectations, they experience chronic stress that mirrors the effects of other adverse experiences. For cognitive development disruptions, as teachers provide less stimulation and challenge to students they expect less from, these students receive fewer opportunities to develop higher-order thinking skills. Also, the achievement gap widening, lower expectations lead to less challenging material, creating a compounding disadvantage that grows over time. But are teacher expectations actually biased against low-income students in real classrooms? To answer this question, we'll turn to Tenenbaum and Ruck's 2007 meta-analysis, one of the most comprehensive examinations of this question ever conducted. This wasn't just one study, but a statistical integration of 39 studies, including over 11,000 students across 2 decades of research. These researchers employed rigorous methodology. They calculated standardized effect sizes to make different studies comparable. They weighted studies by sample size to give more reliable studies greater influence, and they controlled for publication bias by including unpublished dissertations. They analyzed 4 distinct categories of teacher behavior: expectation, referrals, positive speech, and negative speech. Their findings were definitive. Teachers consistently held more positive expectations for European American students than for minority students. The effect size was 0.25. Made more positive referrals for European American students, effect size also 0.25. Directed more positive and neutral speech toward European American students, effect size 0.31. Directed more negative speech and criticism toward minority students, effect size 0.26. These effects remain significant even when controlling for student achievement level and behavior. Critics might argue that these differences are small, but even small biases compound dramatically over thousands of interactions and years of schooling. Moreover, when these researchers focused specifically on studies measuring expectations for students from different socioeconomic backgrounds, the disparities were even larger. These biased expectations directly contribute to ACEs, where the stress of constantly receiving more criticism and less encouragement creates a chronic stressor similar to other recognized adverse childhood experiences. Cognitive development, receiving fewer challenging questions and less rich verbal interaction impedes language development and higher order thinking. Also, for achievement gaps, when teachers provide fewer opportunities to students, they expect less from. Achievement inevitably diverges, regardless of students' actual potential.
These stereotypes are often internalized by students, leading to further negative academic outcomes and educational inequality. Stereotype threat is a manifestation of this internalization, defined as fear of confirming a negative stereotype which can cause stress and anxiety, leading to lower performance in tests and classroom participation. Research from Spencer, Logel, and Davies used controlled lab experiments where participants were placed in high-stakes testing scenarios with or without stereotype cues. The studies measured cognitive performance differences and stress responses, while also analyzing how repeated exposure to stereotype threat influenced motivation, self-perception, and academic outcomes over time. They found long-term effects on motivation and career paths. Internalized stereotypes make some students believe that advanced courses, leadership roles, or extracurriculars aren't for them. This keeps them from developing skills that could improve their future opportunities. Additionally, students who internalize low expectations may limit their own career aspirations, settling for less than their potential. The cycle of poverty continues when education is not fully accessed or valued due to early internalized beliefs and manifests in ways such as those low career aspirations and leading to a lack of social mobility.
The final harmful social structure that we'll address is the relationships between teachers and students. What exactly happens in day-to-day classroom interactions? For this, we turn to the groundbreaking observational research by 3 researchers, Pianta, Hamre, and Allen, who developed systematic methods to observe and quantify classroom interactions. Their research methodology set a new standard for classroom observation. They developed the Classroom Assessment Scoring System, a validated observational tool with specific indicators for teacher-student interactions. Trained observers rated actual classroom interactions on dimensions including emotional support, classroom organization, and instructional support. They conducted observations in thousands of classrooms across diverse settings. They used statistical controls to account for student behavior, prior achievement, and other potential confounders. What did they discover? Low-income students systemically experience less emotional support and positive climate, more controlling and less responsive teaching approaches, fewer opportunities for analysis and problem solving, more disciplinary intervention and negative feedback, less individualized attention focused on their academic growth. The differences weren't subtle. Using standardized measures, the researchers found that students in high-poverty schools received instructional support that was, on average, almost a full standard deviation lower than their peers in more affluent schools. This represents a dramatic difference in educational experience. Critics might suggest that these differences reflect real behavioral challenges in high-poverty schools. However, the research specifically controlled for observed student behavior and still found systemic differences in how teachers interacted with students. This points to a fundamental inequality in relationship quality. These relationship differences directly perpetuate the harms we've identified. Poor teacher-student relationships constitute a direct adverse experience as the classroom becomes a source of stress rather than support, again for these ACEs. When teachers provide less cognitive stimulation and emotional support, brain development in areas critical for executive function is impaired. Finally, less instructional support inevitably produces lower achievement, creating a cycle where initial disadvantage leads to widening gaps over time. Taken together, all of these studies reveal how these social structures become embedded that actively harm low-income students. And this creates a perfect storm where the cycle perpetuates itself unless we deliberately interrupt it.